My name is Nathan Brooks. I'm 36 years old, and I own the only repair garage in a quiet mountain town tucked away in western Montana. It isn't the kind of business that makes anyone rich. Most mornings begin with cold coffee, grease under my fingernails, and pickup trucks that have seen better decades. Folks around here know me, because if something with an engine can still be saved, I'll probably find a way. When the workday ends, though, the silence always wins. 3 years earlier, I buried my wife, Emma, after a sudden aneurysm stole her without warning. One ordinary Tuesday, she laughed at my terrible pancakes. By Friday, I was signing hospital papers I could barely read. People tell you time heals. It doesn't. It simply teaches you how to carry what's broken without dropping it every hour. The garage became my hiding place. Engines were easier than people. A cracked transmission made sense. Grief didn't. That November afternoon, the first snowstorm arrived earlier than anyone expected. The roads emptied. Wind howled through the alley behind the shop, and flakes drifted sideways across the windows until the world outside looked almost white. I was locking the front door when someone knocked. Not loudly, just 3 hesitant taps. When I opened it, a woman stood there holding the hand of a little girl while balancing a sleeping boy against one shoulder. A teenage boy hovered protectively beside her, clutching 2 worn backpacks. All 4 of them looked frozen. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. "Our bus broke down outside town. The station is closed. We just needed somewhere warm for a little while." She apologized before asking. That alone told me she'd spent too much of her life being told she was a burden. "Come inside," I said. Relief crossed the oldest boy's face before it reached hers. The heater in the waiting room rattled loudly as they stepped inside. I found 4 mugs of hot chocolate, mix left over from last winter, and filled them with steaming milk from the tiny refrigerator in the office. The younger girl smiled so brightly over that cup you'd have thought I'd handed her treasure. Her mother almost cried over something that cost less than $1. "My name's Nathan." She hesitated. Lena, the oldest, introduced himself as Mason. His little sister was Ava. The sleepy toddler wrapped in an oversized jacket was Oliver. The children thanked me for every tiny thing. Too many times. Children only learn gratitude like that after they've gone without. Conversation came slowly. I learned they'd moved across the state only weeks earlier. No relatives, no friends. No permanent home yet. She cleaned offices during the evenings and stocked grocery shelves before sunrise. Sleep happened whenever life allowed it. She never complained. She simply described exhaustion the way someone else might describe the weather. Eventually, Ava wandered over to the Christmas decorations, sitting untouched in one corner of the office. "Can I look?" "Go ahead." Within minutes, she had arranged tiny wooden snowmen into an entire imaginary village. Oliver woke laughing. For the first time in years, laughter echoed through my garage. It sounded unfamiliar. It also sounded wonderful. Lena noticed me watching. "I'm sorry they're making a mess. They're making the place better." She looked confused, almost suspicious, as if kindness always arrived with hidden conditions. Snow continued falling outside. The roads closed. There was nowhere for them to go, so they stayed. We talked about ordinary things. Favorite foods. Books. How impossible it was to keep children entertained during winter storms. Every answer she gave revealed another piece of someone who had spent years surviving instead of living. Not once did she mention her past. Not directly. But fear has fingerprints. Every time headlights passed outside, her shoulders tightened. Every unexpected sound made Mason glance toward the door before anyone else. Children notice danger long before adults realize they've been trained to expect it. Hours later, the county announced the highway had reopened. Lena gathered the children quickly. She thanked me so many times that it became uncomfortable. As she zipped Oliver's coat, she quietly said something while staring at the floor. "I don't think people like us get fresh starts." She didn't say it dramatically. She said it like she'd already accepted it, like it belonged beside the weather forecast. I looked at the woman standing in front of me, a mother working herself to exhaustion, 3 children who never complained, a family carrying invisible bruises. The answer escaped before I thought about it. Maybe you've just been looking in places that forgot how to recognize good people. She froze. Not smiling, not crying, simply staring at me as though I'd spoken a language she'd almost forgotten existed. Mason gently touched her arm. "We should go, Mom," she nodded. Before leaving, she reached into her pocket. "I should pay for the drinks." "You already did," she frowned. "How?" "You reminded this place what it sounds like when kids laugh." She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly shepherded the children into the falling snow. I watched them disappear beneath the streetlights. The garage felt strangely empty again. That night I drove home expecting the familiar loneliness waiting inside my house. Instead, I kept thinking about one sentence. People like us don't get fresh starts. Somewhere, someone had convinced that woman she wasn't allowed to hope anymore. I couldn't stop wondering who had done that, or why. 3 mornings later, my office phone rang. "Mr. Brooks, it's Nathan." A brief silence. "This is Lena." Her voice remained cautious. "I know this is strange, but are you still looking for someone to answer phones a few afternoons each week? You mentioned it during the storm." I smiled before realizing she couldn't see it. "I was hoping you'd call." She arrived the following Monday exactly 15 minutes early. Her clothes were clean but noticeably mended in several places. She carried a small notebook filled with careful handwriting. I wrote down questions so I don't forget anything. Nobody had ever prepared that hard for a part-time receptionist job. By lunchtime, she'd organized repair invoices that had been scattered for nearly 2 years. She built a better appointment schedule, remembered every customer's name after hearing it once, and somehow convinced the grumpiest rancher in 3 counties to leave smiling. When I thanked her, she immediately apologized. "I'm sorry if I changed too much." "You didn't change too much?" I looked around the office. "You made it work. For just a second." She smiled, not politely, not carefully. Genuinely, it disappeared almost immediately, but I saw it. And something told me that smile hadn't been allowed to exist very often. By the end of the month, it no longer felt like Lena worked at the garage. It felt as though she'd always belonged there. Customers started asking for her by name. Mrs. Donnelly, who usually complained about everything from oil prices to the weather, brought homemade muffins every Thursday because, according to her, that sweet woman finally convinced me there are still decent people left. The retired sheriff stayed 20 minutes longer than necessary just to hear Oliver's newest words whenever the children stopped by after school. Even the coffee tasted better. I knew it wasn't. The machine was the same ancient thing that sputtered more than it brewed. But laughter has a strange way of improving ordinary moments. Mason usually sat in the corner doing homework after school while Ava colored pictures that somehow always ended up taped to my office wall. Oliver had claimed an old mechanic stool as his throne, pushing himself around the garage with tiny feet while pretending to fix invisible race cars. The place that had echoed with silence for years now carried conversations, giggles, and the occasional argument over crayons. I never realized how much I had missed noise until it came back. One afternoon, Mason wandered into the workshop while I replaced brake pads on an old pickup. He watched quietly for several minutes. "You miss her." I glanced up. "Ooh, your wife." Kids don't ask questions to be cruel. They ask because they're trying to understand the world. "I do." He nodded thoughtfully. "My dad left before Oliver was born." The word surprised me. I had assumed divorce. Maybe separation, not abandonment. "You still think about him?" "Sometimes. Wishing he'd come back." Mason tightened a bolt on the practice engine, sitting nearby. "No." The answer came too quickly. "I just wish he had been someone worth missing." I didn't know what to say. Neither did he. Sometimes silence says enough. Ava burst through the office door, a moment later waving another drawing. "I made you." She shoved the paper toward me proudly. There I stood beside 3 smiling children and their mother. 4 stick figures. And then one more. Me. The garage was behind us. Above everyone she'd drawn a giant yellow sun. "That's nice," I said softly. "It isn't nice," she corrected. "It's our family picture." The room became very still. Lena looked embarrassed. Ava, sweetheart. But the little girl only shrugged. You always say family is people who stay. No one spoke. Eventually, Ava skipped away. Completely unaware, she'd just rearranged every adult emotion in the room. That evening, after everyone left, I found myself staring at the drawing still taped beside the calendar. I didn't take it down. A week later, I discovered why Lena rarely slept. She arrived nearly an hour late. Her hands shook while unlocking the office door. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. You okay? She forced a smile. Just tired, Lena. She looked away. I didn't sleep much. Why? It doesn't matter. It mattered. She spent the rest of the morning dropping paperwork, forgetting appointments, apologizing every few minutes. Finally, during lunch, I set 2 sandwiches on the desk. We're taking 15 minutes. I'm fine. No, I sat across from her. You're exhausted. For several seconds, she simply stared at the untouched sandwich. Then she whispered, "Hey, found us." The words barely reached me. Who? She swallowed. Victor. The name meant nothing to me. The expression on her face meant everything. My ex-husband. The room suddenly felt colder. He somehow learned we moved here. She rubbed her temples. He called yesterday. What did he want? The same thing he always wanted. She laughed once. There wasn't any humor in it. Control. Slowly, carefully, she began telling me the story she'd hidden. Years earlier, Victor had seemed charming, successful, confident. The kind of man everyone admired. No one saw what happened after the front door closed. Every friendship disappeared because he didn't approve. Every paycheck belonged to him. Every decision required permission. If dinner was late, someone paid for it. If the children cried, someone paid for it. Bruises healed. Fear stayed. The night she finally escaped, she'd packed only what fit into 2 duffel bags, while Victor attended a business dinner. She drove through the night with 3 sleeping children and less than $200 in cash. She never intended to stop in Montana. It was simply the first place that felt far enough away. For 11 months, she whispered, he couldn't find us. And now, he says he wants to rebuild our family. She looked directly at me. But that's not true. I already knew. He doesn't miss us. Her voice cracked. He misses owning us. The words landed harder than anything I'd heard in years. What happens now? He says he'll fight for custody. She laughed bitterly. I can barely afford rent. Owns 2 businesses. I don't stand a chance? No. I leaned forward. You don't stand alone. She blinked. Nathan. I know someone. My college roommate, Grant. He practices family law in Billings. I haven't talked to him in months. But if he's half the man I remember, he'll listen. I can't ask that. You didn't. I offered. She looked at me the same way she had during the snowstorm. Like kindness confused her. Why? I smiled gently. Because good people deserve someone in their corner. Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. The quiet kind people cry after holding everything together for far too long. She wiped them away almost angrily. I'm sorry. There you go apologizing again. A sad smile appeared. I know. No. I shook my head. You don't. You apologize for existing. She stared at the floor. My whole marriage. She stopped herself. Never mind. No. I said softly. Finish. My whole marriage taught me that every problem in the house somehow became my fault. The confession hung between us. I realized then that Victor hadn't merely hurt her. He had rewritten the way she saw herself. Every apology, every hesitation, every fearful glance. He had planted them one by one until they became part of her. I picked up my phone. I'm calling Grant. She reached across the desk. Her fingers lightly touched my wrist. Thank you. Those 2 words carried more weight than any speech ever could. Outside, snow began falling again. But this time, neither of us felt quite as alone. Grant returned my call before the garage closed. I remember you only call when it matters, he said after we exchanged the usual greetings. It matters. He listened without interrupting while I explained everything Lena had shared. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Bring her to my office Saturday. Can she afford you? Another pause. We'll figure that part out later. That was Grant. Back in college, He had once driven 6 hours through a snowstorm because a friend needed help moving out of a dangerous apartment. Some people never stop being the person they were meant to become. Saturday morning. Lena looked nervous enough to turn around twice before we reached Grant's office. I shouldn't have come. You should. He'll think I'm wasting his time. He won't. Grant greeted us with coffee and an easy smile that immediately softened the room. For nearly 2 hours he asked careful questions. Never once did he rush her. Never once did he make her feel like she needed to defend herself. By the time she finished telling her story, he had filled an entire legal pad with notes. Finally, he leaned back. Victor isn't looking for a family. Lena nodded weakly. I know. He's looking for leverage. He explained what would happen if Victor filed for custody, what documents they needed, school records, medical histories, employment records, anything showing that the children had built a stable life. Do you have witnesses? Lena frowned. Witnesses? People who know you as a mother? She looked genuinely confused. I don't know anyone well enough. I almost laughed. She had no idea. Over the following weeks, our little town quietly proved her wrong. Without anyone organizing it, people simply showed up. Mrs. Donnelly wrote 3 handwritten pages describing how Lena checked on elderly neighbors after every snowstorm. The elementary school principal documented perfect attendance since the children enrolled. Oliver's pediatrician praised how quickly the little boy had begun thriving after arriving in town. The owner of the grocery store described Lena taking extra shifts without ever once complaining. Even customers from my garage volunteered statements. One rancher wrote, I've watched that woman work harder before sunrise than most people do all week. Another added, her children are polite because they're loved, not because they're afraid. Each letter chipped away at the version of reality Victor wanted the court to believe. Then Victor came to town. I recognized him before he introduced himself. Expensive truck, perfect haircut, tailored coat. Everything about him looked carefully assembled. He walked into the garage smiling. Nathan Brooks. That's me. He offered his hand. I didn't take it. I'm Victor Hayes. I know. His smile never moved. I've heard you've become close to my family. They aren't your property. A flicker crossed his face before disappearing. I'm simply trying to reunite with my children. You mean control their mother? His smile tightened. I can see she's been telling stories. I've seen enough. He stepped closer. You're grieving. The statement caught me off guard. I looked into you. He spoke almost kindly. You lost your wife. I'm sorry. Predators often disguise themselves as compassionate people. You've attached yourself to someone vulnerable. He lowered his voice. People might misunderstand your intentions. I stared at him. So that's the game. What game? Trying to make me doubt myself. He chuckled. You seem intelligent. I thought you'd recognize the risk. The risk, I replied calmly, is that you think decent people scare as easily as the ones you've spent years intimidating. His smile disappeared completely. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who I'm dealing with. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, I walked to the front door and opened it. You've said everything you're going to say in my garage. He adjusted his coat. This isn't over. No, I met his eyes. It isn't. After he left, I realized my hands were shaking, not because I feared him, because I finally understood what Lena had lived with. Victor never shouted. He never threatened directly. He planted doubt. He questioned reality. He made people wonder whether standing against him was worth the cost. That was his weapon. Fear wrapped inside politeness. When Lena arrived that afternoon, she saw my expression immediately. He came here? I nodded. I'm sorry, I sighed. Why are you apologizing? Because now you're involved. I chose to be. She looked down. You still had a choice. You didn't. For the first time since we'd met, she cried without trying to hide it. Not loud sobbing, just exhausted tears. I don't know how to stop feeling afraid. I stepped closer but kept enough distance to let her decide. You don't have to stop feeling afraid. She looked up. You only have to stop believing fear gets to make every decision. She wiped her face. I wish I believed that. You will. How? One decision at a time. The custody hearing was scheduled for early March. As the date approached, the children sensed something changing. Mason became quieter. Ava stopped bringing drawings to the garage. Oliver began waking from naps, crying for no reason anyone could explain. Children always know more than adults think. One evening I found Mason sitting alone behind the garage watching snow melt off the roof. "You okay?" He shrugged. "If Mom loses..." He couldn't finish. I sat beside him. "She's not losing. What if she does?" He stared at the mountains. We finally started feeling normal. His voice cracked. "I don't want to leave again." I looked at the boy who had spent most of his childhood protecting everyone except himself. "You know what normal really is." He shrugged again. "It's waking up without being scared." He slowly nodded. "Then listen to me. No matter what happens in that courtroom." I paused until he looked at me. "There are people fighting for that kind of normal now. For all of you." For the first time in weeks, Mason believed me. At least a little. And sometimes, a little hope is enough to carry someone into tomorrow. The courthouse stood at the edge of town, its old stone walls carrying the kind of silence that made every footstep sound important. Lena barely touched the coffee in her hands. Her fingers trembled around the paper cup. "You don't have to be brave," I told her quietly. She managed a weak smile. "I know, but I have to show up." Grant met us inside carrying 2 thick folders stuffed with documents. "I've reviewed everything twice," he said. "Whatever happens today, remember one thing." Lena looked at him. "You've already done the hardest part," she frowned. "I have. You escaped." His words settled over her like a blanket. The courtroom is only the next chapter. Victor arrived 15 minutes later. He looked exactly the way he had at the garage. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect smile. If someone had met him for the first time that morning, they would have believed he was a successful businessman and a devoted father unfairly separated from his children. Appearances were his greatest ally. The hearing began promptly. Victor's attorney spoke first. He painted a polished picture. A responsible father, a stable home, financial security. A mother who had taken 3 children hundreds of miles away without giving their father a fair chance. Every sentence sounded reasonable. That was what made it dangerous. Grant didn't interrupt. He simply took notes. When it was his turn, he stood calmly. "We're not here to determine who owns the nicer home." The courtroom grew quiet. "We're here to determine where 3 children are safest." One by one, he dismantled the image Victor had built. School attendance records, medical appointments, evidence showing Lena had been the sole parent handling every responsibility for years, employment records proving she had supported the children alone since leaving, letters from teachers, neighbors, employers, community members. Each document added another piece of truth. Then Mason's school counselor testified. She described how frightened the boy had been during his first weeks after arriving in Montana, how loud voices made him flinch, how slowly he had begun trusting adults again. Then she said something no one in the courtroom seemed prepared for. Children don't invent trauma responses. Silence settled over the room. Victor shifted in his chair for the first time. Finally, Lena took the witness stand. I had never seen her look so small. Yet somehow, she also looked stronger than ever. Grant asked only simple questions. He wanted the truth, nothing more. She described meeting Victor, falling in love, believing the promises, then watching those promises slowly become rules. Rules became isolation. Isolation became fear. Fear became everyday life. She never exaggerated. She never raised her voice. She simply described reality. "I stopped recognizing myself," she said softly. "I wasn't making choices anymore." She paused. I was asking permission to breathe. Even the judge lowered his eyes for a moment. Victor's attorney stood for cross-examination. He smiled politely. "A Mrs. Hayes. I kept my maiden name." He blinked once before continuing. "Miss Carter? You admit you left without informing your husband." "Yes. You took his children across state lines." "I protected my children?" "You denied them a relationship with their father." Lena looked directly at him. "No, I denied their father another opportunity to frighten them. The attorney changed tactics. You've recently become close to Mr. Brooks. I've become friends with someone who treated my children with kindness. So there is a relationship. There is respect. And affection. She smiled faintly. Is compassion supposed to be evidence against me? A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. The attorney frowned. He realized he wasn't questioning a frightened woman anymore. He was questioning someone who had finally remembered her own voice. Then came the moment none of us expected. Grant called one final witness, Mason Carter. My heart stopped. Lena immediately shook her head. I don't want him involved. Grant leaned toward her. He asked. Mason walked to the witness stand wearing a borrowed navy sweater that hung slightly too large on his shoulders. He looked far older than 14. The clerk asked if he understood the importance of telling the truth. I do. Grant spoke gently. Mason, what do you want the court to know? The boy looked toward his mother first, then toward Victor, finally toward the judge. My mom thinks she failed us. His voice remained steady. But she didn't. She saved us. No one moved. Mason swallowed. When we lived with my dad. He stopped briefly. My little sister used to cry whenever a car pulled into the driveway. He looked down. She doesn't anymore. Another pause. My brother laughs now. His eyes found Lena again. My mom laughs sometimes too. The courtroom remained completely silent. I don't care where we live. I don't care if our apartment is small. I don't care if we have pancakes for dinner. I just want us to stay where nobody is scared anymore. He stepped down before anyone could ask another question. I saw the judge remove his glasses, slowly, quietly. Even Victor couldn't meet his son's eyes. For the first time since entering the courtroom, his perfect confidence was gone, and deep inside, I knew everything had just changed. The judge said the written decision would be issued within a week. Those 7 days felt longer than the previous 11 months. Lena went back to work because she had no other choice. Bills still arrived. The children still needed dinner. Life refused to pause simply because our hearts wanted it to. But I noticed something had changed. She wasn't walking through each day waiting for disaster anymore. She held her head a little higher. She laughed more easily when Ava proudly displayed another drawing. She even caught herself humming while organizing invoices one afternoon. It was a small thing. Yet somehow it felt enormous. Fear had stopped being the loudest voice in her life. The phone rang early the following Thursday. Grant. I answered before the second ring. Well? He smiled through the phone. You might want to sit down. I'd rather stand. A chuckle. We won. For several seconds I couldn't speak. The court granted Lena sole legal and physical custody. I closed my eyes. And Victor. Supervised visitation only. Grant continued. The judge cited a documented pattern of emotional abuse and ruled that the children's safety and emotional well-being outweighed every other consideration. I thanked him 3 times before hanging up. Then I realized I was already grabbing my truck keys. Lena was stocking windshield wiper fluid when I walked into the garage. She looked up. One glance at my face told her everything. She covered her mouth. No, I nodded. It's over. The bottle slipped from her hands onto the concrete floor. Neither of us cared. You won. For a heartbeat, she simply stood there. Then years of fear seemed to leave her body all at once. She cried harder than I'd ever seen. Not because she was weak. Because she no longer had to be strong every second. The children arrived from school a few minutes later. Mason read the expression on his mother's face before anyone spoke. We're staying. Lena dropped to her knees. We're staying. Ava screamed with joy and threw her arms around both of them. Oliver laughed because everyone else was laughing. Mason didn't move immediately. He walked over slowly, then hugged his mother so tightly that neither of them could breathe. I told you we'd be okay, he whispered. She shook her head through tears. No. You believed we'd be okay long before I did. Life didn't magically become perfect. Healing never works that way. There were difficult days. Memories that arrived without warning. Nightmares that occasionally woke the children. Moments when Lena still apologized before asking for help. Each time, I gently reminded her, "You don't have to earn your place here." Eventually, she stopped apologizing so much. Months passed. The garage became busier than ever. Not because of advertisements. Because people enjoyed being there. The waiting room always held crayons. Someone was usually baking cookies. Customers lingered longer than necessary just to hear Ava tell another impossible story or watch Oliver proudly inspect tires with a plastic flashlight. The building that had once sheltered only my loneliness now echoed with life. One spring evening, nearly a year after that snowstorm, I asked Lena to stay after closing. The children were helping sweep the floor. Sunlight poured through the open garage doors. "I've been thinking," I said. She smiled. "That usually means you're about to surprise me." "I hope so." I reached into my toolbox instead of my pocket. She laughed. "Only you would keep something important besides socket wrenches." I figured nobody would look there. Inside the small wooden box rested a simple ring. Nothing extravagant, just beautiful, like the woman standing in front of me. I took a slow breath. "The day you walked into this garage, I thought I was helping a family get out of the cold." I smiled. I didn't realize they were rescuing me from a life that had forgotten how to feel warm. Tears gathered in her eyes. "You gave this place laughter. You gave my house purpose. You reminded me that loving someone again doesn't erase the people we've already loved. It simply proves the heart was built to keep growing." I looked toward the children. "They've never been something I had to accept. They're the reason I fell in love with you." Then I met her eyes. "You once believed people like you didn't get fresh starts." I gently took her hands. "I think the world just hadn't met you yet. Lena Carter, will you marry me?" She didn't wait for another word. "Yes." She laughed and cried at the same time. Ava shrieked loud enough to scare birds from the nearby trees. Oliver clapped because everyone else was cheering. Mason walked over quietly. Instead of saying anything, he hugged both of us. It was all the answer either of us needed. We married that autumn beneath golden aspens on the edge of town. The ceremony was small, simple, perfect. Mrs. Donnelly baked the wedding cake herself. The retired sheriff insisted on decorating the reception hall. Grant stood beside me as my best man. Nearly everyone from town came, not because it was a wedding, because somewhere along the way, our little family had quietly become theirs too. Years have passed since then. The garage is still busy. Only now the office walls are covered with framed drawings instead of unpaid invoices. Ava dreams of becoming an artist. Oliver follows me around with a wrench tucked into his tiny back pocket, convinced every machine in the world needs his supervision. Mason is preparing for college. One evening, while we finished rebuilding an old pickup together, he handed me a socket wrench without looking up. "Here you go, Dad." The word caught me completely off guard. He froze. I mean, you meant it." He nodded slowly. "I did." I wrapped an arm around his shoulder. Neither of us said anything else. We didn't have to. Some moments are too full for words. Every winter, when the first snow begins falling outside the garage windows, I remember the woman who once stood at my door convinced life had already decided her future. She thought she and her children would always be defined by what they had survived. She couldn't see what everyone else would eventually discover. Strength isn't measured by never falling. It's measured by finding the courage to keep walking after every fall. People sometimes tell me I saved Lena and her children. They're wrong. I opened a door. That was all. They were the ones who filled an empty building with laughter, turned grief into gratitude, and reminded one lonely mechanic that home isn't a place waiting for you at the end of the day. It's the people who make you grateful to return there. Sometimes the greatest gift you can offer another person isn't money or advice or even protection. Sometimes it's simply refusing to believe the painful story they've been told about themselves until they finally stop believing it too.